So Liechtenstein kept it cool, kept it street, and now recently, during the blockchain advent, came up with a very interesting framework. And now I have the pleasure, and please welcome me in welcoming Alexis Esneault. Is this correct pronounced? I hope. You're originally from the US, right? So she's an attorney at Nagele Attorneys in Liechtenstein, and will have a presentation for us about the Liechtenstein Blockchain Act. Please, a warm applause. And likely a little Q&A after, because we have enough time.
Sorry, what? And
likely a Q&A session afterwards for the people. So take your time.
Perfect. Okay. So my name's Alexis Esneault. Nice to meet you guys. I'm originally from Alabama. And yesterday was my birthday. So I flew all day on my birthday to come hang out with you guys. I didn't see a single soul that I knew on my birthday. So to come here. Okay, perfect. So we have the slides. Can I get them on the screen? Is that a no? Okay, that's okay. So I'm going to be talking to you guys about the Liechtenstein Blockchain Act, which in my mind provides legal certainty within a token economy. And then it's also known as the Trusted Technologies Law. And I need a clicker, I think. Sorry, guys. Okay, and then how do I, okay. Perfect. So just as a disclaimer, I said I'm from the United States. I'm actually licensed to practice law in Alabama, but I work at a Liechtenstein law firm, and we only advise on Liechtenstein law. So I just have to make that very clear to you guys. And I guess the question is kind of, how does a girl from Alabama end up in Liechtenstein? So I know some of our panelists earlier were talking about, oh, well, we need to wait on the US to kind of create legislation to figure out what we're doing here. But then I kind of took the opposite approach and said, hey, well, I know that this little tiny country in Europe is actually doing things and making big waves in terms of blockchain and cryptocurrencies, so why not pick up and move to Liechtenstein? Because I saw a unique opportunity to actually effectuate legislative change. So that kind of brings us to the question of what's the point in creating a law? I know a lot of the panelists earlier were saying, oh, well, we need to wait and figure out what other jurisdictions are going to do. But then the law touches everything. So there's a need for legal certainty within the newfound token economy surrounding blockchain and cryptocurrencies. So you need to create legal certainty for both entrepreneurs and consumers alike. So the current dilemma is that the law is kind of always 5 steps behind new innovations in technology. So how do you ensure that the new technology remains legally compliant within this atmosphere? So in terms of, is a Liechtenstein law possible? This is the wrong presentation slide, but I kind of flipped the graphic in my other slide. And so basically what we have is a situation where Liechtenstein is an EEA member state. It's not an EU state. So they still have to be compliant with the laws of the European Union. So what, in my mind, that creates is if you look at a comparison to American law. So you have the United States Constitution, which provides a floor. So you have regulations that you have to comply with, but then that doesn't mean that you can't build on top of that floor and create your own legislation. So here we have this situation where Liechtenstein is an EEA member state, and then you have the EU regulations that you must be compliant with, which includes MiFID and everything else that the panelists this morning were discussing. So Liechtenstein saw an opportunity to kind of create legal certainty surrounding this token economy. So it provides guidance for entrepreneurs and other regulators. And also, seeing that Liechtenstein is an EEA member state, it provides the possibility to passport certain licenses throughout the rest of the European market. So it allows access to the European market, so to speak. So we have this situation where what exactly is a token? And that's kind of the main question surrounding, or at least in the viewpoint of the Liechtenstein regulators, is how do you define token? And that's kind of at the heart of the Blockchain Act in Liechtenstein, is because a token can have several meanings. It can be physical tokens, physical money, aids for identification. The second graphic here is when you log into your bank account, you used to need the keys to log into your bank account. So that could be a token as well. It can also represent cryptocurrencies and then many more things. So essentially, a token is information that represents an underlying right or a right to nothing. So that was actually, I think that goes to show the in-depth nature of the Blockchain Act in Liechtenstein, is the fact that I was sitting there reading through the draft legislation, and I go, what on earth do you mean embodies nothing? And then everybody in the office goes, well, Alexis, that's Bitcoin. And I go, but Bitcoin is a store of value. And everybody in the office goes, no, it's only a store of value because people agree that it has a store of value. So at the end of the day, I mean, that's debatable. You can say that mining and the power expended with mining that goes into it gives Bitcoin its value. But at the end of the day, it's just a string of numbers. So that's, and then in regards to other things that tokens can be, they can give you access to a network. So for example, utility tokens, or they can be discounts to purchase a service or product, or a claim of membership in respect to a legal entity, or even title to a physical object. So in particular, the Liechtenstein regulators view certain functions of tokens, including a legitimization function, the liberation function, and the transportation function. So with legitimization function, that proves an existing claim of right. So for example, a creditor's claim against a debtor. But then the liberation function proves that the debtor is free of that obligation. Then you also have a transportation function. So you can tokenize a physical object and then transfer that physical object via a digital token. So under the current civil law in Liechtenstein, the problem that they view it as is the information on the data storage system is immaterial. So how do we define something that's immaterial under pre-existing, for example, property law? So you have laws that exist that are applicable to different kinds of tokens, but not necessarily immaterial tokens, such as Bitcoin, for example. So what the Trusted Technologies Law of Liechtenstein, the Blockchain Act, aims to do is subject tokens to their own independent legal rules. So creating more legal certainty regarding these immaterial aspects of tokenization. So the TTL's legal definition of a token is information on a TT system that can embody fungible claims or membership rights to an individual, goods, and or other absolute or relative rights, and ensuring the allocation of one or more public keys. So I think the key word within the definition here is that it can. So that goes back to the whole representative of nothing versus representative of something that could be a physical object. So at the end of the day, what it does, and this is just a draft law, by the way, it's still in the works, so that definition is subject to change, but it provides an autonomous regulation of a token that's abstract and technologically neutral. So that allows for growth and change within the industry. Because at this point, I mean, we're 10 years in with blockchain technology, but you don't necessarily know where it's going to go at the end of the day. So, and then it also encompasses rules for transfer and legitimization according to the Blockchain Act. So, like I was saying earlier with property law, you have the physicality lacking. So you have this immaterial thing, and then how do you deal with it within a legal framework? So then, therefore, you need some sort of newfound legal certainty. So that led to the coinage of what we like to call the token container model. And within the token container model, the goal was to provide an all-encompassing definition for all forms of tokenizable rights. So in terms of highlights of the token container model, it does away with the normal classifications that you see in other laws, because people are looking towards the pre-existing definitions of utility versus payment versus security tokens. And now they're trying to embody rights of all kinds. And then it also includes a focus on public versus private keys, and what those mean for assigning of a token versus disposing of a token. So you have the power of disposal held by the person who can dispose of the token. Then you can have a party authorized to dispose. So somebody else, in a sense, can hold that token in trust. So that proves to be pretty interesting, and then requires more legal certainty. So for example, with a delegate, to be authorized to dispose of somebody else's token. So in regards to different kinds of tokens, this allows for a broad spectrum of tokenization. So I know the hot topic right now seems to be security tokens, and that's definitely a shift that we've seen. We've seen a focus shift from basic ICOs regarding utility tokens to more focusing on securities tokens and making that happen. And actually in Liechtenstein, curiously enough, our law firm was involved with the first ever securities prospectus for the sale of a security token that was approved by a regulator within Europe. And this was back in August, so I actually started work in September. So this is before I started work. But we were involved in the drafting of that securities prospectus that was subsequently approved. Let's see. So this involves or creates legal certainty for the tokens, the consumers, and the TT providers, encompassing all areas of a token economy. So then you have your embodiment of the right within the token on the TT system, and then it helps kind of highlight different areas of this that people haven't necessarily thought of. So, and then I think this is a really interesting point. So the Trusted Technologies Law puts forth different roles for people that they can fulfill within this token economy. And one of my friends the other day, when I was talking about my presentation, she goes, but isn't the whole point of this decentralization? And then I think the whole point of the conference here today is leading towards a decentralized world. But then what do you do when you're trying to move from the notion of centralized intermediaries to decentralization? Because you have these traditionally regulated centralized intermediaries, and then now we're moving towards the area of decentralization. So the Trusted Technologies Law attempts to put forth different roles, some of which can only be fulfilled by certain licensed people. So it attempts to kind of bridge the gap between the offline and the online and offline worlds. So that's what the role of the physical validator does. And then in what I was talking about earlier in regards to certain providers that have to be licensed, the TT protector has to be licensed. And then, for example, the TT protector holds tokens on account of a third party. So that must be a regulated bank or fiduciary. So I know we all want to move towards decentralization, but that's not exactly going to happen overnight. So it's more of how do we kind of bridge this gap and make this happen in creating legal certainty. So in essence, I think that Liechtenstein is very unique because, like I said earlier, it's an EEA member state, so it's not an EU state. So that allows for passporting of certain rights throughout the rest of the European markets. So it gives it gives entrepreneurs and consumers access to the European markets. And then another unique thing that I think that when I always talk to people, people say, why Liechtenstein? Why come to Liechtenstein over another jurisdiction? Because like he was saying earlier, it's kind of the battle of the jurisdictions at this point. Then how do you choose which jurisdiction is most favorable as an entrepreneur? So the regulatory authority that's actually responsible for carrying out the Trusted Technologies Law in Liechtenstein is the Financial Market Authority of Liechtenstein. And when I think of Liechtenstein and what makes the country so successful, most people think banking. You know, everybody, when I say, oh, I moved from Alabama to Liechtenstein, they go, well, obviously you work at a bank. Not true. Not true. But then, so the Financial Market Authority is also responsible for different regulations within the banking sector. And then they're the ones that are responsible for having made banking so successful within the country. And then in addition, you have short lines of communication between you and the regulatory authorities in Liechtenstein. So it's not uncommon for our office to put in a request to the FMA and have a response the next day. So, and then again, it's centrally located in Europe. So for those of you, how many of you know where Liechtenstein is? Okay, good. If you ask somebody from the United States, they probably go, oh, I have no idea where this country is. Everybody thinks I live in Germany, so it's actually kind of interesting. But then in terms of being centrally located, I think that's a good benefit as well. And then it's reputable in terms of banking, so that's also another benefit. So in essence, what the Trusted Technologies Law does is it provides legal definitions for the essential elements of a token economy. So it also provides a basic definition for a token to serve as the basis of a token economy. So it's token focused, but then remains neutral and agnostic as opposed to breaking down the different classifications of tokens. So it creates legal certainty for the purchase of tokens, definitions of minimum standards for central service providers, minimum standards for token issuance, that's the basic information requirement, and then procedures and rules for governmental supervision. So I guess that kind of begs the question, why would somebody go to a jurisdiction that created more regulatory hoops that you have to jump through, in essence? But then I think that the whole benefit of that is that it creates certainty for consumers that allows them to trust in these systems because they're new And then I know personally, my favorite quote, one of my favorite quotes is, ignorance is the parent of fear. So it's not necessarily ignorance is bliss. So people are afraid of what they don't know. And then how do you trust in these systems that you don't know if there's no legal certainty surrounding it? So that's kind of why I think the Liechtenstein Blockchain Act is so solid. And then if anybody is interested, the consultation report is available in both German for you. I don't know if anybody else speaks German, right? So both German and then English, but then that's still in the drafting phase. And I will say they put a lot of thought into it because you print the consultation report, it's 170 pages with the draft law, and then the government going through and explaining every single step of why they chose certain things over other things, and then why it was necessary to create the law in the first place. And in addition, it is expected to come into force this summer. So it has already moved through the public consultation phase, and then now the working group of the Blockchain Act is meeting again to revise in light of those comments that we received. So, yeah. Does anybody have any questions for me?
Yeah, thank you so much. First question is, are these slides available somewhere?
I can talk to my boss and I can make it available in a PDF
because
version.
I saw some people taking pictures. Maybe you can. All right. Any questions? I mean, you see a very smart lawyer. I can say. Probably I know why your boss sends you here. Maybe he's a bit afraid that you challenge his position a bit too early in your career. You know, so he sends it to the conferences to present. So, okay, we have a question.
Is there any exclusion for any? Is there any exclusion for any specific countries as regards to being part of that law?
Okay, so that is an interesting question because what the Trusted Technologies law does is it only applies to Liechtenstein, but then at the same time, it offers a choice of law for entrepreneurs in other jurisdictions.
Can I give you a real-world example?
Yes.
A Russian client that wishes to obviously look at Liechtenstein as an option as regards to cryptocurrencies. Is there an exclusion of certain countries, or are all participants welcome to utilize this new law once the legislation passes in June or in the summertime, I think you said?
So it applies to Liechtenstein-based entities.
Okay, so they would have to set up in Liechtenstein, first of all.
Yes.
In order to utilize that new law.
Yes, because the only exception to that would be is if your jurisdiction that your company is sitting in allows for you to use Liechtenstein as a choice of law.
Okay.
So.
Okay, and is there any, how can I put it, is there any adverse effects to this law coming into play, or is it sailing through as regards to the legislation?
Well, it's actually a really cool point that you made right there is Liechtenstein has an overwhelming amount of government support surrounding this legislation, which is really cool. So I was at an event the other day, for example, and my boss goes to me, hey, you want to meet the Prime Minister? And then the Prime Minister sits down next to me after presenting about blockchain and what it means for Liechtenstein and how it can contribute to the Liechtenstein economy. So
What's
in terms
the
of
population
barriers,
of Liechtenstein?
37,000.
37,000. So not a lot of people, but fully behind the concept. How refreshing.
So in terms of, well, I mean, support within Liechtenstein, yes. I mean, that's not a lot of people, but then what we see it as is an opportunity. I say we, you know, like I'm a Liechtensteiner, but I'm not, I'm an American. But it's an opportunity to show other jurisdictions. And I know one great example is, yes, I'm an American, and one of the coolest things that I thought was we had congressional officers and senators' offices asking us for our advice on how to draft legislation in the United States. So I don't think that the small size of Liechtenstein is any barrier to this law having an impact.
No, that's great. That answers my questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Any more questions or comments? No? There's one.
Okay, I have many questions, but yeah. So how's the law interoperable between nation states?
Sorry, what was the?
How is the law interoperable? How is it?
Oh, interpretable between. Okay, okay. So you mean by other people interpreting our?
Interoperable. Operable.
Oh, operable between different nations. Okay, okay. So in terms of
security tokens, security regulations.
Oh, securities regulations. Okay, okay. So I know that securities regulations within Liechtenstein, it always depends on the jurisdiction, to be completely honest, because certain rules that apply in Switzerland will be different than what applies in Liechtenstein. And in terms of securities requirements, like I said earlier, our law firm successfully helped draft a securities prospectus for the sale of security tokens. And then certain prospectuses, certain licenses are passportable to other jurisdictions, but it really just depends on the case. So.
Good answer. Any more questions? Otherwise, I have one. There's one question. Let's all answer these questions. Take a seat if you want. There's plenty of space, so you have free choice. And I know you like free choice.
Yes, can I ask about the banking system in Liechtenstein? Does it support this regulation?
Fantastic question. So that is one huge benefit that I view of Liechtenstein over other jurisdictions, is that we have a very, very, very friendly banking atmosphere. I don't know if any of you guys have ever heard of Bank Frick, but Bank Frick is kind of the leading example in Liechtenstein that you can do things with crypto in terms of compliance and KYC, that you can meet these standards. It's looking at something that you haven't necessarily seen before. So we have banks that are willing to go the extra mile to jump through all the regulatory hoops to take the client that walks in and says, oh, I have 500,000 francs that came from cryptocurrency gains. But then that's a whole different matter. But then the banking is very, very friendly within Liechtenstein. And we actually have 3 different banks that are operating within the crypto sphere and willing to accept crypto clients, and then that would be Bank Frick most notably, and then also Union Bank and Kaiser Partner are operating within the sector. So,
any more questions from the audience? Okay, one last one. You can have that.
Hi. Well, how long it will take for me to bring my company in Liechtenstein, settle everything, and start operating? Well, let's say a typical average blockchain product, let's say, as a time frame.
So the most common form of incorporation that people tend to pick with blockchain-related projects is the Aktiengesellschaft, which is the AG in Liechtenstein. So that's the equivalent of a PLC. And in terms of getting off the ground and running, it's really not that long, but then, like he pointed out earlier, banking relationships are the biggest hurdle to jump through. So you can't establish the actual corporation without first having a bank account. It's kind of the give and take at the same time, but you have to have that banking relationship to go ahead and establish the corporation. So time to incorporate is really not that long.
And how expensive it is?
So the minimum capital requirement for an AG, which is working capital, is 50,000 francs. And I believe that can be francs, USD, or euros. But then that's also a working capital requirement. So it's not as big of a hurdle as people might think it is.
Thank you very much.
I have a regulation coming from a regulation skeptic. So advocating, complete freedom of regulation. But in the presentation, I don't know if I got it right, I'm also not a lawyer. I saw that it would be a central authority that needs to be like a person, right? An actual someone of a decentralized network or application or whatever token. So is it then really decentralized anymore, or is it actually then centralized? And compared to Bitcoin, right? Like, do you want to, does Satoshi Nakamoto has to come to Liechtenstein to operate? No, it's completely decentralized. So it's basically obsolete or pointless.
Yeah, no, that's a really great question. So I think that in terms of, blockchain presents a really unique opportunity to have completely decentralized autonomous organizations. And if something is fully decentralized, then the, I guess, legal aspect of it is kind of put back into the hands of the users of the system. Because if you have a fully decentralized system, I know that was something we were talking about in a workshop the other day, is but am I going to be liable as the software provider? And in Liechtenstein, you're not liable as a software provider that creates this decentralized autonomous organization. So because you're viewed as a software provider instead of a system operator. So I don't think that necessarily takes away from decentralization, because I think that the basic information requirements, the TTL and certain regulatory hoops that they have you to jump through are more for if you're issuing a token, then there's certain legal requirements surrounding that. And I don't think that it necessarily, yes, it's more regulation, but then, like I said in my presentation as well, you can't go from just completely regulated and centralized intermediaries to a decentralized system overnight. So I think the Trusted Technologies Law does a nice job of kind of bridging the gap.
Another question is, how is Bitcoin a thing also? I mean, in Switzerland, I believe you can actually go to any train station and purchase Bitcoin on the ticket machine.
Well,
so that would be interesting to hear if Liechtenstein also says, let's accept Bitcoin for tax payments or make it, you know.
Liechtenstein, you can buy Bitcoin at the post office.
Wow,
that is a new thing. You can actually walk
nice.
into the post office and buy Bitcoin.
And maybe last one, kind of companies do you already have? Can you disclose any names? I don't know if you can, but what are use cases and success stories that already are incorporated in Liechtenstein? Maybe that's interesting for the people.
So I'd say that kind of the first blockchain unicorn of Liechtenstein, so to speak, is, if you guys have heard of Eternity. Eternity is actually, Eternity is actually upstairs in our office. So we're all in the House of Blockchain. So the first 2 floors are our law firm, and then the floor above is Eternity, and then the floor above that is our co-working space. So the House of Blockchain co-working space.
You have a final question? Okay, fine.
Sorry, it's a bit of a late question. I'd like to ask you, I know this might not be so much, law related, but perhaps you could give us some insight as to how Liechtenstein views, crypto trading. Is there a leading exchange? Is there a lot of trading going on with locals?
Okay, so in Liechtenstein, exchanges has become the next big question. So I only started work in in September. So it was kind of strange because I saw the shift, or the focus shift from ICOs to then STOs, and then now people are talking about forming exchanges. And there are some in the works, but then of course I can't disclose anybody that we're working with because of attorney-client privilege. But then there's definitely people looking to start exchanges in Liechtenstein. So.
All right, thank you so much. Warm applause again. Now a bit more applause because we are more people. And